Good morning.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
So, everything is included. Everything is welcome, right? But there seems to be injustice. There seems to be. And if there is
injustice meaning terrible things happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if there is a movement towards change
Mm-hmm.
to what we perceive as being injustice,
Mm-hmm.
is that just shifting the dynamic? I mean, if there's always light and shadow, if everything is included.
No. It doesn't mean, so this perception doesn't mean that you don't do anything, you don't respond. You don't respond to injustice. It doesn't mean that you don't have any response to hate, ignorance, greed, starvation, violence, sickness, suffering. It doesn't mean because you see the inherent inclusiveness that everything, the all is wellness, right? It doesn't mean, therefore, then you don't do anything. It's actually just the opposite, because it's the awakening of love, of compassion. Not the idea of love, not the kind of love that's sort of all mixed up in the mind where one goes around trying to fix everything that they think is wrong or correct all injustices, but it's the love that comes from this intuitive spiritual heart. It's that just an innate compassion that reaches out, right? It reaches out because that's its nature. It doesn't necessarily reach out with a bigger agenda, because the bigger agenda is always something that our minds are creating. But there is a way in which that love will reach out. It will move, in other words, and it will respond.
But if you are, say, shining a light,
yes,
is there not always a shadow created by that positive action? Because everything is in balance that way.
Do you know that? Or is it an idea?
That's what I've been sort of discovering. That it seems to be that every push includes a pull.
Well, that's true. That's true. Let's see, what I'm describing is something different. There's a saying in Zen, enlightened action leaves no trace, which means it's not of the world of duality. It doesn't come from, it may express itself in the world of duality, but that's not where it's originating from. So it's not generating the same sort of dualistic outcomes, right? Light and shadow go together, good and bad, this and that, right? It's an action that doesn't leave a trace, that doesn't leave an opposite because it's not arising from the opposites. An action that arises from the opposites, I'm going to do good as opposed to bad, then that action based on that idea will generate both. It'll generate both good and bad, light and dark. It's unavoidable. But when this action comes from beyond duality, beyond the right and wrong, the good and bad, the this and that, it doesn't leave a trace. And the reason it doesn't leave a trace, because it has no agenda. It's not doing what it does for a particular reason. Because all reasons are in the mind, are dualistic ideas. So all I'm saying is there is a response. Because look, you have to respond. You are always responding, right? Mm-hmm. Even if your response is not to respond, you've responded. Mm-hmm. And that response, even if it's to do nothing, has an outcome, right? It has a consequence. something happens. So there's actually no way to bow out of it. You know what I mean? We are always responding, we're always acting. In that sense, we're always involved. Even if we try not to be, still, we are.
So there's a possibility of accepting that which we see as being injustice and still moving in a positive way in response to it.
Yeah, and ultimately, this is the thing it's based on. When there's a deep understanding that what happens on the exterior, what we see, what happens on the exterior is nothing more than a manifestation of the interior, right? So what happens on the exterior, everything and everybody is expressing in the way they move and behave in life. They're expressing their consciousness, right? So everything on the exterior is actually a manifestation of the interior. You can't change the interior by changing the exterior, right? When we're trying to change the exterior, then we're in the world of duality. So you do this, and you make this better, but you don't realize you've made this worse, right? And so that's our history is full of that, right? We try to do good, and it creates just as much evil as it creates good. But when our response or our action is actually an outcome and an expression of an undivided consciousness.
I just got it.
You get it? Then it's different. All right, great. And it's everything to do with one's motivation. If that motivation is undivided, then what you might, like I said, we all act whether we want to or not, but the most important influence we're having is our consciousness. The most important thing we're doing is our consciousness. And it's our consciousness that has far bigger impact than what we do. You know? It's like, a lot of people grow up in life, anybody grows up, and you see, as you grow up, and some people see this very early, this thing, what do they call it generally? Hypocrisy. Right? Everybody has, right? You just turn on the TV and you'll find hypocrisy everywhere. But it is somebody saying one thing and doing another, right? They're saying one thing and doing another, which means they're saying one thing, which is their idea, but what they ultimately do is an expression of their consciousness. And the way they do it, and the outcome it has, is an expression of their consciousness. And you can pick this up. It's like some people will say very, very nice things. They'll say all the right things, and they'll even do a lot of nice things, but you can sense something inside of them. Have you ever had somebody like that? Like somebody's always smiling at you, they're pretending to be really happy and bubbly and lovely, but you can actually sense there's this interior rage inside of them. Have you ever had that experience? And if you're sensitive, you'll pick up on that. And you sense, my God, even though they're bubbly and smiley and they're trying to look right, what they're transmitting is actually, they're transmitting that rage. That's what they're doing. And that will manifest. It will have to manifest. That energy will eventually have to manifest. So it's part of the beauty of our own awakening is we come upon the possibility that we no longer have to move from a divided state. When our consciousness is no longer divided, then our activity doesn't have to be divided. And whatever our activity is carries the presence or the perfume of that non-division. Does that make sense? It's the same way if you're sensitive. Many, many years ago, I came upon this when I would be reading different spiritual books. And I came upon this capacity whereas I can open a book and actually just by holding it in my hand, I could feel where the author was before they even said anything. And some of you probably know what I'm talking about. I could feel exactly where their consciousness was, and then when I would open the book and I would read it, then I could really feel it. And the interesting thing is, some people, you can have two books, let's say, and they basically are saying the same thing, but they can have drastically different presence they're transmitting to you, right? And what you're getting is you're getting the consciousness of the author, where they're at when they are coming up with these words, when they're writing them down or speaking them or whatever they're doing. And if any of you have had that experience, then you really start to know how powerful this thing of consciousness is, that consciousness is carried in the words we speak, in the words we write, in the actions we perform. Our state of consciousness is always being expressed. And you can have two people say exactly the same words and have extraordinarily different outcomes. Same words, totally different outcomes. Is why you could have a sage like Nisargadatta. Nisargadatta was just a chain-smoking wild man. If you ever seen videos of him, I know people have read a lot of his books, but somebody actually brought me one time this video, not the one that's produced, but a home video that they had taken of him. And it's just him doing his thing, and it's like 2.5, 3 hours long and he just seems like a maniac. He's sitting there smoking one after another, hand-rolled cigarettes, and he's always like, his arms are waving around like they're almost disconnected from his body, and he's kind of a combination between talking and yelling at people, And if you just had the visual and the words, you would think, my God, what an offensive human being, And of course, it tickles me to no end that on this particular video there, he lived in, where was it? Was it Bombay? Bombay, in this apartment, and he has in this little room that you could pack like 30 people in, just like sardines, 30 or 40 people, and they were just really packed. 2 big fans going, cars honking. It's a city, right? It just sounds like rush hour outside. He would go around before he would sit down to do satsang, and he would sing these bhajans, because his teacher asked him to sing bhajans 5 times a day, and he used to say, I don't need to sing bhajans anymore, but I do them out of respect for my teacher. He asked me to do them, so that's what I do. So he did that for the rest of his life, and he would light incense, and he'd have these incense, urns, and each one would have like 5 or 6 large incense sticks. And he would light them all, 5 or 6 incense sticks, 9 of these things, in this little teeny room, fans going, traffic blaring, him smoking. I mean, you could hardly part the clouds in this room. And he's, talking a mile a minute. And someone would sit down in front of him, right in front of him on the floor, and they would start to talk, and he would often lean on his... He would just look at the wall like he was the most bored human being in the world. And they would ask him his question, and then he'd turn, and he'd turn on like this energizer, and all of a sudden, Well, I think from a conventional perspective, this wouldn't be the look of the Indian sage that people expect. Ramana fits the sort of the stereotype of the Indian sage. That was his destiny. Nisargadatta was quite different, and yet when you watch this, and of course if you could feel the books that were made about his teaching, but if you're watching this, you knew, you could sense something extraordinary was happening. It was just watching this infinite hurricane unleashing itself. And the people who went to see him, whether they understood or not, all felt that they had been in the presence of greatness. Even though he would often kick people out of the room. Just, you leave, you go, you out. Someone would ask him, why do you kick them out? He'd say, I don't know. I just kick them out. You know? So there's, these sort of, like, the point I'm making is even this exterior thing that I think to a lot of Westerners wouldn't fit their idea, nor their ideal, and yet there was this extraordinary awakened wisdom coming from him. And as a lot of you know, it's affected immense numbers of people in the way that Ramana has in many, many others. So it is that consciousness that speaks, that is the most important thing. What's the state of that consciousness? What's the state of your consciousness?